Hello everyone, my name is Tayva Anderson. I'm currently a senior at Air Academy High School and I'm head of my speech and debate team there. And I've been doing OO for about 6 years now if you include middle school. So let's just jump right into this lesson. I'm going to be talking kind of fast because I have a lot of information that I'd love to give to you guys. So yeah, let's just get started right away. So first, what is OO? OO is a speaking event that at max is 10 minutes and 30 seconds with a grace period. However, it's often somewhere between 8 minutes and 10 minutes. That's the usual time that it takes for a normal OO. And the goal of OO is to change the audience's mind on a certain subject, issue, topic, whatever you pick. So if many of you have done any informative type of events, it's very similar to OO in the sense that they both have the same structure almost, but OO is persuasive and informative is informative. That's the main difference between those. So let's just jump right into the OO process. When you're first starting your OO, the first part of any OO is to pick a topic. And in my opinion, this is the most important part of any OO speech. I've seen so many speeches where they have a great performance, they have great hand gestures, they have a well-written speech, they're very eloquent on stage, they just have a great confidence to them. However, they have a bad topic, and that ultimately brings the entire speech down. However, I've also seen competitors with amazing topics and some performances that weren't as great as the other ones, and yet they still make it pretty far. So having a bad topic can ruin your entire speech. However, having a good topic can create a stable foundation for a great speech. So how should you pick your topic? Where can you find an OO topic? Let's go over some factors to consider when looking for an OO topic. The first and most important thing is that it has to be something that you are passionate about. I've seen so many competitors go up there with speeches where you can tell that their coach made them choose this topic or they don't really care that much about it. And it really shows through their speech and it kind of disengages the audience. It's like, if you don't care about your speech, why should I care? So finding a topic that you are passionate about and that you want people to hear you about is crucial in OO, and that is the most important part. Second, try to avoid really general topics. So topics like racism and sexism, I happen to see a lot in the OO world. And these are very important topics that need to be talked about. However, keep in mind that you're trying to do a 10-minute speech. And within a 10-minute speech, it's really hard to cover the entirety of racism. That is something for maybe an hour-long speech or something like that. But keep in mind that's a 10-minute speech, so really general topics like that won't really work. Instead, what you want to try to do is narrow down racism or narrow down sexism. And what I mean by that is, instead of talking about sexism as a whole, talk about the gender pay gap between male and female. Talk about that instead. Instead of talking about racism in particular, talk about police brutality. So talk about factors that contribute to that general overview rather than racism and sexism alone. Things like that. The next one I have is to avoid really specific topics. And this one is kind of contradictory to number 2, so you want to try to find some middle ground. But what I mean is that really specific topics such as like why McDonald's is your favorite restaurant and why we should all be eating McDonald's are fine, but the problem is that they may not have enough information. So you may not find enough studies, and keep in mind it's an 8 to 10 minute speech, so you want to have enough information to fill up that total 8 to 10 minutes. All right, and then moving on, try to avoid really controversial and political topics. So this one is going to take a little bit more explaining, but there's a clash between beliefs and ideas. Ideas are really, really easy to change. An idea is something like, oh, I think that the theory of evolution exists. and then you can back that up with evidence, and then someone else can have a different idea, and then you can argue those out, and eventually some of those may change. However, there is such a thing as beliefs, which you just believe in something. It's very hard to change someone's opinion on something that they believe in. It's like saying, I believe in God, and someone else saying, well, I don't think God is real. That clash between those two, no one's going to budge on that. No one's going to really move on their opinions on that. So try to have a topic that is centered around an idea rather than a belief. And this is where the political topics come in. So I've seen a lot of OO topics on specifically, let's say, abortion and pro-life and pro-choice. Oftentimes, the pro-life and pro-choice argument does come down to beliefs and ideas. Or beliefs, sorry. So a lot of times it comes down to religion sometimes, things like that. So I'm not saying don't do any political topics. Just try to keep in mind that ideas are so much easier to change, and try to stay away from topics like why everybody should be Christian or something like that. And number 5, the topic should have some good and credible, abundant research. So you want to make sure that your topic has a good sense of credibility to it, that it has a lot of studies supporting your idea, and that it ultimately just makes your speech better. That all of these studies actually contribute to your speech and they don't take away from it. So just make sure that your topic has that kind of logos, pathos, ethos in it as well. So how do you find a topic? There are so many ways people find OO topics in our daily lives, but for me personally, one of the easiest ways I found to find an OO topic, and this is going to sound strange, but I either like to scroll through Psychology Today and look at all of their articles and find something that catches my eye and I think that that's interesting, and then I do some more research on that, and that's how I find a topic. Or I take a look at my daily life, and if someone, let's say someone close to me does something, and I'm like, then I start thinking, wow, why did they do that? Why did they do that certain thing? Was it society's kind of influence on them that made them do that? So I start thinking about why I start doing all of my daily things, why people are doing their things. And that one is a little out there, but that's sometimes how I find my OO topic too. So just observe your daily life, do some more research. That's one of the most credible ways to find good topics. So let's say you have your topic, and now it's time to write the speech. So writing the speech is a lot like informative if you guys have any experience in that, but it's going to be a 5-paragraph speech. So first you have the introduction, the first body, second body, third body, and then the conclusion. So first let's talk about the introduction. The intro should have the elements of a good introduction should be a hook, then some context, then some thesis. You should have all 3 of those in your introduction in order to make a cohesive and clear introduction for your audience. So the intro or the hook should grab the reader's attention, and this can be with a story, an anecdote, a fun fact, singing, dancing, statistics, or something shocking too. And what I mean by something shocking is that I saw a girl one time talk about period poverty in her OO. And the way she started it was she stood up, she looked directly at all of us, and she said, I have a vagina and blood comes out of it every month. And it was really shocking for all of us just to hear her be so blunt about it. But that's how she started her OO speech, and it actually went pretty well. So that's what I mean by something shocking. So that's your hook. But then you need some context. So what are you talking about? Try to lead us from your hook into your thesis. This is the transition part of your introduction. And then you have the thesis. The thesis is the guidance statement for your speech. It is absolutely essential for a great speech. It's very hard for judges to follow along with your speech if they don't know where you're going. And if they're trying to figure out where you're going, that's going to distract them from the overall message and essence of your speech. So a lot of times I use a 3-point structure. So something like, so today let's first blank, then examine blank, and finally identify some blank. So that kind of 3-point structure is one I see a lot, and I use it as well. That's a very basic one. You can evolve your thesis however you like. Just make sure it's in there, and it usually goes at the end of the introduction paragraph. Okay, so next we have the first body paragraph. And for all 3 body paragraphs, there really is no strict formula for what they should contain. I've seen a ton of speeches where all of their first paragraphs were completely different and had different subjects, and they completely worked. So what there usually is, though, is a topic sentence, a source, your analysis of that source, and then a transition sentence from the first body to the second body. A lot of times, this is pretty common in OO, but the first paragraph will sometimes define something, examine why something happens, etc. So the first body paragraph is kind of like your introduction to your topic. You kind of did that in your intro, but this is kind of just expanding on that more. So examining something, defining something, things like that. So second body paragraph, again, like the first body, there is no strict formula. There's usually a topic sentence, a source, your analysis, then a transition. And this paragraph usually describes why we should do something about your topic. Like, okay, I know what it is now and I get why it's a problem, but why should we do something about it? What's gonna happen if we just leave this go? Or if we just let this be and don't do anything about it. So this is where usually people start to get a little negative in their speech. So like, this is the effects it could have on our society, things like that. And the third paragraph, this is the solution paragraph. So again, there is no strict formula. Usually there is a topic sentence, a source, your analysis, same thing like that. But you should have at least 2 practical and realistic solutions to your problem. So I've seen a lot of OO speeches where their solution has been, let's reform the government. And that's a great solution, but the problem is that you're talking to everyday people. These people in your room are most likely not going to have a big impact on our government. You're not talking to a Congress member or anything that can directly do something about that. So instead of saying, let's reform the government, ask them to sign petitions telling them to reform the government. So just make sure that your solutions are for everyday people and that they are realistic and available to the general public. So also you want to make sure that your solutions are backed up by ways to do them. So instead of saying something like, instead of your solution being, let's just all be happy, say, okay, in order to be more positive in our life, we should all write notes of encouragement to ourselves, explaining why we're so awesome. Things like that. So you want ways to do these. You don't just want to throw out a solution and then leave your audience kind of hanging there. And last and finally, not least, we have our conclusion. So in your conclusion, you want to state/restate your thesis and end on a positive and uplifting note. So you can maybe mention your intro, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. So you want to make the audience feel like that you've accomplished something together, that you've gone through this 10-minute speech and now you all are ready to solve this problem. So you always want to end your conclusion on a positive note. A lot of times I see speeches that end on a negative note, and the problem with that is that it leaves a bitter taste in the audience's mouth. It's just very sad and not very encouraging at all. So you want to end on a positive note. So when I say restate your thesis, this can just be completely copying your thesis into the conclusion, or you can just switch up some words, it's not really that important. But again, make sure you end on a positive and uplifting note. Sometimes this is a quote from someone that supports your argument. Sometimes it's just an inspiring message. But what you should get from the conclusion is the entire essence of your speech. That's what you want to get from that. So let's go over the summary of what I just said and kind of some timing things as well. So the introduction should have your hook, some context, and some thesis. And this is usually going to be around 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the max. Then you have your first body paragraph, which should answer the what. What are we talking about? What is this thing? Then you have the second body paragraph, which should be the why. Okay, I know what this thing is now, but why should I care? Why should we all care about this? And the third body paragraph should be the how. Okay, I know why we should care about this, what it is, but how can I help? How can I do this thing or aid this cause? So the first, second, third paragraph, that should all come around to 7 minutes maybe. And then the conclusion, which should contain the thesis and the message, should be around 30 seconds to 1 minute. Again, these times are interchangeable, whatever you need, specifically in your speech, whatever works for you. This is a general outline that I've seen a lot of speeches do, and I tend to stick by this too because I think it's a pretty good guideline. So whatever you need to do with those times, try to make sure your intro isn't longer than 3 minutes, I would say. But everything else is pretty interchangeable. So let's go over some tips for when you're writing your speech. So as you're writing your speech, make sure that you read it out loud to yourself or to other people just to make sure it sounds right when it's spoken. And then when you're writing, try to write in a professional yet simple manner. So you want to be eloquent in your speaking. You want to be very credible, if that makes sense. So you want to look like that you know what you're doing, that you know what you're talking about. However, you don't want to use big fancy words that no one except for you can understand. Because again, you're talking to everyday people, so it's most likely they're not going to understand really advanced terminology. So keep it simple and yet professional. Don't use slang, don't use anything like that unless it actually aids in your speech. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then keep in mind that most judges will be over 25 years old. So I've seen a lot of speeches that hinge on pop culture references. And the problem with that is that a lot of times the judges don't understand them because they're typically older than 25 years old. I'm not saying don't use pop culture references. I've certainly used them before as like tiny jokes or something like that. But make sure that your entire speech isn't hinging on pop culture specifically. All right, so now let's go into some more specifics of OO. So this is something a little bit more advanced that not every speech needs. I've seen a lot of speeches with them though. It's called a guiding metaphor. So this is an analogy of some sort that leads the audience through your speech. It's not necessary in every speech. I've seen speeches go to nationals and get up on that final stage without this, but sometimes it can help your audience guide you through your speech. So this can come from your intro, and it's usually established in your thesis. So for example, you could do, let's first start our car, then drive our car, then arrive at our destination. And weave those through your first body, second body, third body paragraphs. So if you do use a guiding metaphor, include mentions of it throughout your speech. And this can usually be done through topic sentences or transitions. Speaking of transitions, the most important rule about this is to never, ever, ever, ever say first, second, third, or in conclusion. When judges hear this, it makes the speech sound unoriginal and basic. Try to be more creative. And if you have a guiding metaphor, this will make it much easier. So you can say something like, okay, we've identified our illness and established why this thing happens, and now it's time to discover this and find a cure. So something like that can help. And then next, let's start talking about sources and quoted words. So as per NSDA guidelines, there are only 150 quoted words allowed in each speech. So you can use as many sources as you like, but make sure that you don't quote over 150 words. If it gets to that point, you can start paraphrasing instead. That is totally okay, but no more than 150 words should be quoted. And I know I just said that you can use as many sources as you'd like. However, you don't want to include, usually speeches don't include more than 9 or 10 sources in your speech, as it can sometimes become muddled with information and just become very, very complicated, which is going to be hard for your audience to follow. So whatever works for your speech, if you want to use 15 and you can make it work somehow so that it's still not muddled with information and that it's still clear and concise, go ahead and do that. However, for most people, usually 9 to 10 is a good stopping point. Places like Psychology Today are great sources. The CDC, the World Health Organization, newspaper sites, things like that are great. Stay away from Wikipedia and satire sites. So like The Onion, stay away from those. Don't use those as credible information because it will backfire on you and it will make your speech seem very immature and like you didn't really study up on this. So don't use Wikipedia, don't use satire sites. Next, let's talk about some humor and drama. So in your speech, you want to include a healthy dose of both. You never just want to be humor heavy, you never want to be drama heavy, and you never just want to have none of those because that's going to be a very, very boring speech. But for humor, it's highly recommended. It's not necessary, although I think you should include it in your speech. One way to include humor is through, and the most common way actually, is through self-deprecation. So this is actually pretty, self-deprecation can be used in your speech to kind of lighten up the mood and to show the audience that you are a human and that you're actually talking to them. You're not just a speech or whatever your speech is saying. You're a human and you have flaws and you're just talking to them. So jokes like that can definitely lighten up the mood. Other stuff you can do sarcasm, you can do some irony, you can do pop culture references as jokes. And now let's talk about drama. So drama is crucial to a dynamic and interesting speech. You never want to start or end with this. Don't start or end on a negative note. Instead, what you want to do is you want to include some drama maybe in your third or second point. This will be the emotional climax of your speech. And you can use your own struggles, an anecdote from you explaining how this issue that you're talking about has affected you personally. And when you use drama, you want to break your professional demeanor with the audience and talk to them more casually. Talk to them like they're kind of like your friends and you're just telling them a story about what happened. Again, this is not drama interpretation, so don't start crying on the spot. Don't be over dramatic. Don't start yelling at the audience. But you want to be honest and real with them. Like say, hey, this is the thing that happened to me and this is why we should do something about it. So continuing on, let's say you've written your speech, you've edited it, you're ready to go. So let's talk about the OO triangle. And I'm actually going to stand up for this. So the OO triangle is a 3-point walking stage. So for your intro, you want to stand in the middle, like this, shoulders back. You want to look confident and you want to keep your head up high. Then for your first point, you're going to walk either right or left, whichever way you want to go, and you're going to take 4 to 8 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to talk to your audience like this for your first point. Then for your second point, you're going to walk across the stage or the room to the next spot, and that's going to take about 6 to 10 steps. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you're going to talk to them for this for the second point. Then for your third point, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 back to the middle. This is your third point. You're going to talk about them about that. And then for your conclusion, you're going to take 1 step forward. and finish out your speech right here. The O-O triangle is very, very important to the O-O speech. It is important that the O-O triangle is there because it kind of marks where you're transitioning in your speech, and it keeps the audience engaged with your speech as well, because no one just wants to watch someone stand in one position, because that can get kind of awkward. Okay, now let's talk about some hand gestures. So the more casual, the better. And again, I'm actually going to stand up for this one as well. So what you want to do with hand gestures is that you definitely want to keep them above the waist. So keep them right here, right here, right here, right here. Never, ever, ever go like this, or this, or this, or this. Because when you keep them below the waist, it shows that you're not really confident in what you're saying, and that's not very purposeful. It kind of looks like a mistake. So keep them at your side when you're not using them, and when you are, keep them above the waist. And then what you also want to do is your gestures should enhance your words and not take away from them. So you want to have gestures frequently, but not too infrequently. So you don't want to have too much and you don't want to have too little. You need to find a nice spot where it's still enhancing your words, but it's not necessarily taking away from them. And again, keep gestures above the waist as always. Some basic ones are like this, or like this, or like this. Basic things like that. So that's for hand gestures. But now let's talk about some eye contact and voice. Don't make constant eye contact with the judge. That is very, very awkward. Instead, what you want to do is you want to go around the room. So glance at, remember, you're speaking to an entire room full of people. So continue to glance around the room, things like that. You never want to be like a sprinkler. So you never want to go like, I'm looking at this person, now this person, now this person. You want to make it look very natural. So just very casual, natural, things like that. So after writing your speech, go through it and find the most impactful moments, the moments that you want the audience to remember. And then what you want to do then is mark it up. And then when you get to that part, look at the judge, make direct eye contact with them. At that part where you know you want this part to land, you want the judge to remember this part, make eye contact with them then. So eye contact's pretty basic, but for voice, try to stay away from something called O-O voice. An O-O voice is basically where there's a pattern within your voice for every single sentence. So it's something like, I'm talking like this, now I go up, now I go down. And you just keep on doing that for every sentence. So like, my dog likes bacon and so do I. I like doing this and this. So you just keep on doing that throughout your speech. That is not good. It'll kind of put your audience into like a trance and they won't really be active listening. So try to keep the voice dynamic. Try to switch up when you go high, when you go low, when you go soft, when you go loud. And then also try not to sound conceited or all-knowing. This is something I see a lot in OO, but again, you're trying to relate to your audience and these are everyday people. So you don't want to sound like you're basically like they're so grateful for your presence or that you're there to teach them because they're idiots, because they're not. What you want to do is you want to be considerate of that as well. So let's talk about throughout the year and what you should be doing. Let's say that you've memorized your entire speech, you've done all your blocking, your eye contact, your voice, you've memorized the OO triangle. What you want to try to do then is becoming consistent. So this is one of the final steps of the OO and it's critical for NATS and qualifying season. So like memorizing your speech, you should also memorize your blocking, eye contact, voice, your timing, etc. This is one of the most difficult parts of the OO process because it is so hard to remember every single gesture, every time you should make eye contact with someone. However, after practice and repetition, this will become easier. One great way to start is to correlate these within your speech. So like once you get to this part of your speech, you should be at 7 minutes, things like that. So becoming consistent is the ultimate goal of OO. To perform it every single time the same way is amazing. And then these are just some general tips throughout the year. So number 1, don't be afraid to edit your speech. Nobody on their first try, I think, can write a Nats-worthy speech just out of the blue. Writing or making a Nats-worthy speech is something that takes time. You have to see other competitors and be like, oh, I like that thing they did. Let me include it in my speech. Don't steal from competitors. That's not what I'm saying, but maybe you liked how they transitioned, so make your own version of that within your own speech. Throughout the year, you're going to see speeches that are better than you. Instead of moping on the fact that they're better than you, try to understand why they are better than you and make edits to your speech over time. So yeah, don't be afraid to edit. You don't have to have the speech that you wrote at the beginning of the year be your entire speech for the entire year, because that's crazy. One thing I like to do is I like to do video recordings of myself, because oftentimes my blocking can sometimes look awkward, and I didn't know it would look awkward until I watched myself on a video. So video record yourself throughout the year. Make sure that it still looks natural, casual, and yet professional. And then do an audio recording as well. So make sure that you're still engaged in your speech, even though throughout your entire speech, and that there's not a part that seems very fast, very slow, that sounds weird. Go through that, make changes, and memorize those changes. So in conclusion, OO is a very tricky and yet beautiful speech event. I love it to death. OO is one of the best things I think about forensics. It's one of the greatest passions I have right now. So in total, I'm so happy that all of you have decided to pursue OO. And that basically concludes this presentation. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me. I'm sorry if I went fast at some parts. Feel free to pause the video, take notes, and thank you all so much.